In Chapter 15, we're going to be discussing understanding and preventing terrorism. You know, events of September the 11th added a new dimension to American policing. Experience now tells us that the first responders to any future terrorist incidents, no doubt, is going to be our local police, our fire, and our rescue personnel. As a result, law enforcement officials must now strategically rethink our public security procedures and practices in order for them to maximize the full potential of their resources. Let's talk about the terrorist overview here. Terrorism is occurring throughout history, and it has been going on for quite some time. Culturally, politically, socially, psychologically, economically, religiously, or any combination of these. Terrorist is a method of fighting, in other words. It allows the very weak forces to attack a stronger power, trying to disrupt their social organization is what it's actually taking place in those type things. They're not happy with the way these individuals are running their countries, or something that they've done politically, or they may not even like them because of their democracy, and they attack them in order to get them to give in to their ways. Let's talk about some of the motivating factors, as I just mentioned, and some of them are, again, religious factors, some of them are political, and some of them are simply a social system as far as the attacks are concerned. Now let me try to define terrorism for you first of all. There's no really single definition or universal definition, but the Federal Bureau of Investigation uses guidelines that set forth in the United States codes, and it defines terrorism as the unlawful use of force and violence against persons or property to intimidate or coerce a government, the civilian population, or any segment thereof in furtherance of political or social objectives. So that's the way they defined it in order to give us an idea as to what terrorism actually is all about. Now, most terrorist acts results from, once again, dissatisfaction with a religious group, a political group, or some type of a social system or policy, and it's frustrating the other side, and as a result, they try to change us or change that group through violent means. So this is how terrorism happens, as a result of someone being dissatisfied with a particular group. Let's talk about classifications of terrorist acts. The FBI actually has two different categories. One is called domestic terrorism, and the other is called international terrorism. Now, domestic terrorism is just simply carried out by groups that acts entirely within the United States, and they don't have any foreign outside influence. And international terrorism is just the opposite. They're foreign-born or foreign-based type of people that directs their anger towards the United States, and they're coming from outside of the United States. So that's the difference between domestic, which is homegrown and happens all within the United States, versus international type of terrorism. As far as funding is concerned, terrorists, of course, need money in order to do the things that they do. Money is needed to carry out these acts, not only for weapons, but for general operating expenses. And many terrorist operatings are financed by, believe it or not, charitable groups, wealthy people that are sympathetic to the group's cause. Also, terrorist groups commonly collaborate with organized criminal groups to deal drugs, arms, and even in some instances in human trafficking. So all of these are funding sources, and some of the things they do, some of their common methods of how they operate. Let's talk about the federal response to terrorism as far as Homeland Security is concerned. In 1996, the FBI established a counterterrorism center to combat terrorism. In that same year, the Anti-Terrorism and Effective Death Penalty Act was passed on for those that engage in terrorism, including several specific measures that was aimed directly at terrorism. This act enhances the federal government's power to deny visas to individuals that belong to terrorist groups, and also simplified the process for deporting aliens and other people that are convicted of certain crimes. As far as hometown security concerns, local police, as I stated earlier, are very important when it comes to terrorists. State and local agencies can and must play a vital role in the investigation and prevention of future terrorist acts. Across the United States, there are nearly 17,985 state and local law enforcement agencies. Now, these agencies and their 765,237 officers that they employ daily patrol our state and highways out there. So as a result, they have a lot of knowledge of what the community is doing and what's going on in the community that they serve. So they've developed a close relationship with the citizens, and they have a great deal of knowledge about their area. So they definitely have to be involved in the terrorist attacks that are taking place. One entity can't do it. As far as information gathering and information sharing, this has to be a cycle. It has to be something that continues to take place. It's not sufficient just to simply gather data. Data has to be analyzed, and it has to be shared systematically with neighboring law enforcement agencies. It just can't be held by the FBI and not shared with the locals. So intelligence gathering includes sharing that information so that others can get involved and help and make a difference as well. So everyone has to get involved in order to tackle this type of a problem. Community policing and the war on terrorism. Again, in spite of all of the things that have been taking place, we still cannot take community policing out of the picture. September 11th attacks undoubtedly shifted the priorities of policing, but again, we can't let the war on terrorism have us abandon what we've done so far in community policing, because this too is going to help in the long run. To do so would not only be counterproductive, but it will also arrest the progress that we've already made in policing over the recent decades, which has taken it to another level as far as society is concerned with getting involved and being more willing to help law enforcement. Let's talk about the role of the media. The media can play an important role as well as far as terrorism is concerned. Now, that can be positive or negative depending on their response. So the war on terrorism, the media can play a very vital role. As a matter of fact, the media, is one of the late Richard Clutterbuck said, he was an economic professor and an expert in political violence. He said the media is like a loaded gun lying on the street. So in other words, the first person to pick it up and get it decides how to use it. So the government's trying to use the media as their loaded gun by embedding reporters in active war zones and in terrorism, and they use the media to justify their violent acts and spread their message. So it depends. It can go on the positive side, or it can go on the negative side. So we have to make sure that we use the media in a positive way to get the message out, to get prevention out. And that's really what it's all about. We all have to come together and try to prevent these type things from happening, rather than setting fuel to the fire that's already there. In summary, most terrorist acts result from dissatisfaction with a religious group, a political group, or some type of social system or policy that they don't agree with. The FBI classifies terrorist acts as either domestic or international. Also, the first line of defense against terrorism is that patrol officer that's out there in the field. Two concerns related to the war on terrorism deals with civil liberties that may be jeopardized, as well as people of Middle Eastern descent that may be discriminated. So in other words, we have to worry about our civil rights being stepped on, as well as we don't want people to be victimized simply because they're from a certain country or they have a certain skin color if they're in the United States legitimately and are part of our system.